very interesting remark from one of the people who are hoping to cast their vote, that the line is very short. And so that's possibly a discussion we're going to take forward now. And we're joined by the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Election Support Network, Andrew Makoni, and the Global Advisor and the SADC Executive Director of Good Governance Africa, Chris Maroleng. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Andrew, let's start with you. What do you make of that comment from a person who's about to cast their vote in Zimbabwe, remarking about a very short queue that is outside that polling station where my colleague is? Is that something to talk about, Andrew, the fact that we have just over 6 million eligible voters in Zimbabwe? Question is, where's the rest of Zimbabwe?
Well, I'm in Mount Pleasant constituency here in Harare, and thousands are actually gathering, waiting to cast their votes at one of the polling station there. It seems that perhaps they're not on. There's been low turnout, but here in Mount Pleasant and in other parts of Harare I have visited, there've been a high turnout. The challenge I've seen is that some materials have not been delivered to the polling stations, and as a result, where I'm standing right now, voting has not started, but we have thousands of people milling around the polling stations, waiting to cast their vote. In the Borodo suburb, where I also observed and voted at one of the polling stations, again, there were some delays, but minimal. I voted 20 minutes after polling was supposed to start, and I was the first voter. There was a long queue at the polling station, 3 different polling streams in that polling station. Materials delayed. I understand that there were challenges with the local authority ballot papers, and this is something I'm getting in a number of polling stations in Harare, where some delays are being experienced.
Chris Maroleng, I see you shaking your head somewhat when Andrew speaks about voting material that is delayed in some areas. That blame, who should we place that to? Is that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission?
You see, Koli, what's going on today is the performance of a democratic act in a deeply autocratic society, and that's the irony of what's going on. What is being described to us by Audrey and Andrew, in my view, is orchestrated chaos, in particular in urban areas, which is designed to frustrate voters in areas that are known to be the hotbed of the opposition in Zimbabwe. It appears, Koli, that during every election, what we normally notice is that in urban areas, there's this kind of chaos, difficulty in voting, and ultimately a situation is created where the majority of the electorate in rural areas are basically shepherded to the polling stations, intimidated, and they are made sure to vote in a certain way, typically in favor of Zanu PF.
Andrew, orchestrated chaos. Do you think that orchestrated chaos is going to be confined to urban areas, and this is where we are told that that's the stronghold of the opposition? What about the rural hinterlands? Do you think that there are likely to be similar challenges there?
We are still gathering information as to what is happening across the country. I know that some delays were also experienced in another urban area in Mutare. Delays are also being experienced in Bulawayo. But I've noted information of what is happening in the rural areas. Perhaps by midday, the story will be able to tell as to what exactly is happening there. But the challenges we have experienced in urban areas is that there's been delays caused by the materials which have not arrived. And in particular, I'm standing here in Mount Pleasant constituency, and materials are still to arrive more than 2 hours later, 3 hours later.
Chris Maroleng, there has been ongoing talk about the voters' roll not being made available. And again, we are going to bring into the conversation the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Is there something to be said about their management of this election? And do you suspect that that will be the major talking point pre- and post-elections?
Only when we look at elections, basically an election is the voters' roll. If the opposition and even the governing party is unable to be presented with a verifiable, credible voters' roll, it challenges the legitimacy of such an election. And definitely what we're seeing in Zimbabwe as part of this orchestrated chaos and difficulty in establishing a legitimate outcome is based on the voters' roll in the main. It is surprising that even at this stage, on the day of elections, that many of the opposition have been unable to receive a verifiable voters' roll. You spoke earlier on in your introduction of approximately 6 million eligible voters. Is that actually the case? And of those 6 million, if the voters' roll has not been verified, how can we definitely know who is going to be turning out at the election? In many instances, as part of an attempt to engineer outcomes in support of Zanu-PF, what we've witnessed clearly in the past has been ghost voters appearing on that voters' roll. Basically, people are not just ineligible to vote, but people ultimately who do not exist.
Final question to you, Andrew. There was a statement issued by the Commissioner of the Police who was warning against any issues that may arise, and he seemed to be talking or laying the blame at some political leaders. He was very careful not to mention anyone by name, but simply to say some people are already talking about not accepting an outcome. Your thoughts around that particular warning from the country's law enforcement authorities? These are the people that have been blamed in the past for victimizing the opposition.
I would say that an age, in particular, as Zimbabweans at this stage, to remain peaceful and await, the voting process to conclude and the announcement of results. Yes, the Commissioner of Police has urged political parties to accept the results of this election, and it's something which I cannot comment on as an observer, but basically say that the law is very clear. ZEC announces the results of the election, and any a candidate who is not happy by the results of is announced by the ZEC can take the matter to court, to the Constitutional Court in respect of a presidential election, and to the Electoral Court in respect of any other election.
Andrew Makoni, let me thank you very much for your time. He is with the Zimbabwe Election Support Network. And Chris Maroleng, thank you indeed for your contribution to this discussion. He is the Global Advisor and the SADC Executive Director of Good Governance Africa.